statement here. The Metropolitan Council Chair has determined it is not practical or prudent to conduct an in-person meeting in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Accordingly, committee members will participate in this meeting via telephone or other electronic means, and the meeting will be conducted under Minnesota Statutes 13D.021. We encourage you to monitor the meeting remotely, and you can email us at public.info@metc.state.mn.us. I will call the meeting to order. This is the July 15th, 2021 meeting of the Land Use Advisory Committee. And Sandy, will you call the roll?
All right, we'll start with Abdi Sado. I don't see her. Jonathan Badema. I do believe he will be a part of the meeting. He texted me for a link, so but not here now. Gerald Bruner. I think he might be on mute. I see you though. Jennifer Geisler.
Here.
Carl Drotning. Don't see him yet. April Graves. No. Kathy Hemken.
I'm here, but I've got to duck out now. I'll be back in a couple minutes.
That's okay. Noah Keller. I believe I see him on, but he may be muted. Noah?
Can you hear me okay? I am
Yep.
here. Okay.
Okay, good. Thank you. Philip Klein.
Here.
Okay. Trista Matt Castillo. Not yet. Kathy Mokel. Not yet. Steve Morris.
Here.
Saw him. Mark Nelson. Not yet. I know Mitra was not going to be here. Dan Rowe.
Here.
Here. Courtney Schroeder.
Here.
Okay, yep, I thought I saw him. And Wendy Wolf.
Here.
Okay, we definitely have a quorum.
Okay, awesome. Next up.
Gerald Bruner is here.
Okay, Jerry.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is the approval of the agenda, and if there are no objections or suggestions for changes, I will just declare the agenda approved. Next up after that is approval of the minutes from the May 20, 2021 meeting of the Land Use Advisory Committee. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve. Motion to approve, Phil Klein.
Okay.
Second, Steve Morris.
Thank you.
Nobody has any discussion or changes to the minutes? Being none, then Sandy, take the roll again for approval of the minutes.
Okay, we'll start with Abdi Sado. Still not here. Jonathan Badema. Gerald Bruner.
Yay.
Aye. Okay. Carl Drotning. Not here. Jennifer Geisler.
Yay.
I didn't hear that. Maybe you're on mute, Jennifer.
No, I said yay.
Okay, good. Good. April Graves. Still not on board. Kathy Hemken. Still stepped away feeding her eagles. Noah Keller.
Aye.
Phil Klein.
Aye.
Trista, did she come on? Don't see her. Kathy Mokel. No. Steve Morris.
Aye.
Mark Nelson.
Aye.
I see he's here now. Okay, good. Dan Rowe.
Aye.
Alrighty, and Courtney Schroeder.
Aye.
Good to go. And Wendy Wolf.
Aye.
All right. Those minutes are approved.
So next up would be the information section of the meeting, and we have a 2040 debrief of comprehensive plan updates with Patrick Boylan.
Thank you, Chair Wolf. Everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent, thank you. I had sent out some homework. It got out a little later than anticipated, so if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I'm not collecting or taking grades, but if you do take a look at it, or if you have questions after this meeting, please feel free to get a hold of me. So
Hold
anyway,
on for 1 second, Patrick. Greg, can you mute Kathy Hemkin? Because we're getting some feedback and I think she's the only one that's not muted.
okay, ready? I'm sorry, you can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair Wolf. Should we start? Getting a little bit of feedback on myself. I'm hearing an echo of myself. Can you hear me okay without an echo?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, then I'll ignore what's going on in my own ear. Anyway, thank you. My name is Patrick Boylan, and I'm a sector representative for districts 13, 14, 15, and 16, most of which is in Dakota County. And I've been to council since the early Palenti years, which means that Wendy has endured sitting with me at various community meetings for the last 14 years or so. So thank you. I'm here today to describe the project I've been leading, and I'm very excited to facilitate a focus group of everyone here today. So before we do that, I'd like to introduce my team and provide some context before we get started. Within local planning assistance, I'm honored to be working with Mr. Jake Riley and Ms. Caitlin Shampoo. Jake couldn't be here with us today, but he is a sector rep like me for part of Anoka County and most of Washington County. And like me, he's a principal reviewer for comp plan amendments and various environmental reviews. Caitlin, if you could take a moment and introduce yourself quickly.
Yes, of course. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everyone. As Patrick said, I'm Caitlin Shampoo. I'm an associate planner in the local planning assistance unit and a project team member for this project. I've been in this position since about April, but I've actually been with the council for a little over 2 years at this point. I was an intern in local planning assistance before that. I work on a lot of our technical assistance projects. I assist with reviews and review tasks and a bunch of other things, but I'm really excited to be here and listening to the conversation today.
Excellent. Thank you, Caitlin. So a little bit of, if you could go to the slideshow, please. I can't, I'm gonna turn my own, for some reason I can't see the slides at this point. He's got it. Okay, if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you, Greg. Late last year, we kicked off this project with an objective to evaluate the tools and resources provided by the council, like the local planning handbook, and help navigate the 2040 planning process. Also, an objective is to engage local governments and other stakeholders in review of the administrative and review processes of the 2040 plans. The expectations that will integrate engagement efforts of this project work in process for the next regional development guide, which is starting soon. Next slide, please. The work completed so far, we've had 111 survey respondents of local community planners. We've also designed and surveyed the council's various technical reviewers. Sector representatives under Angela have held dozens of one-to-one conversations with local planners. And last month in June, we held focus groups with local planners in which were facilitated by council research staff. Generally, you've heard good things about the council's technical assistance, including local planning handbook and PlanIt resources that we developed. However, revealed in the survey last winter and in the focus groups last month, we also heard the need for clarity on required elements and a desire to have more communication between council staff and local planners. A suggestion that came up several times was the desire to have council staff come out to city halls and present in front of planning commissions and city councils. Just want to note that Metro Cities has been a great partner as we develop the focus groups, and Patricia Naum and her staff have participated in all 4 of the focus groups we had with local planners last month. Next slide, please. The upcoming work includes a focus group with the council's tech reviewers, a summary and recommendations to community development leadership. Well, thank you for listening to me today, and I hope you have a sense of what we've done so far. And for the rest of this agenda item, we want you all to be participants in another focus group we've heard from the local planners that work in your communities and other communities around the Twin Cities Metro. And now I'm excited to hear your responses as policymakers about your perspectives. The questions we're going to ask are very similar to the ones we asked previously. Before we get into questions for the focus group, are there any questions right now? Okay. I can see like 3 people. I saw 3 shakes of the head in the negative. So next slide, please. Okay, the first question, this is open. This agenda item, we figure about 30 minutes. So I've asked my manager, Angela, to kind of give me the 5-minute warning. We have 4 questions we'd like to ask. It'd be great to have a conversation, more so between you as policymakers from the local area. And my job will be just to ask questions and maybe provide some clarity if needed and some probing, but to mostly to listen. So the first question we have here for you today is, what did your community hope to get out of the comprehensive planning process? Wendy, I think you're muted.
Yep, you're right. I was muted. Sorry about that. Anybody want to respond to that?
Chair, if I may.
Yes.
Phil Klein. Yes, Chair. One of the things that we found, basically, the pandemic and everything else that was prior, we really didn't do much with our past. We basically just updated it only as far as the years. And every city is different. Every community is different. And our community our plans hadn't changed that much. So we basically, I don't want to say copied, but in all actuality, that's basically what we did. And we submitted it. One of the issues that we did have is that we did have to submit it 4 times, and it kept coming back denied. And I'm not exactly sure why, because everything that they had requested was checked off, and it still kept coming back. I don't know if we just read it and didn't have enough time. Met Council didn't have enough time to look at it. I'm not exactly sure what the issue was there, but that was one of the things that we ran into.
Say, Phil and Chair Wolf, if I could interject for a second. I'm not going to respond to any of this. I want this to be a free-flowing conversation. But Phil, if you could then respond to this question, and then everyone else can too. When you speak, let me know. I don't know everyone in this group. In fact, I know very few people on LUAC. So if you could just say where you're a policymaker, where you were a policymaker, and just a little summary about what your role was. If you were involved in a technical aspect, go ahead and say that. If you were a review person, as far as a planning commission, or if you were on some study task group, or if you were a city council member or a mayor or something like that, and you actually voted, that would be really helpful for me to know. But Phil, if you could actually let me know, provide a little bit of context for me, that'd be great.
Yeah, no problem, Patrick. Sorry about that. Yes, I am a city council member for the city of Hugo. I've been on the council now for 14 years, and just got reelected again for another 4-year term. But yes, we have to approve as you know, the overall. We have to approve all of this, and so we do have conversations with our staff to get to find out what the hot points or issues are. So yes, I'll just leave it at that.
Excellent, thank you.
Anybody else?
Chair.
Sure, Jenny?
I
Or
can't tell
Dan,
who's
if you want to go
talking to me.
first.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll go quick. This is Dan Rowe. I'm the mayor of Roseville. So I'm one of the voters on approving our comp plan, and I was actually involved in the process of our previous comp plan update also, either as a council member or as a candidate for the council at that time. I can't remember, it's too far in the past. But I was just going to note that I think, our council was expecting this to be pretty much of a small, light touch type update as well. And as we got into the process, I think we noted that because of some of the different requirements that were, that had been brought forward as part of the system plan that was not, things that weren't covered by our previous comp plan, we did have to add some elements. We did make a much more robust environmental and resiliency type chapter. And we also had to address, because there was a bus rapid transit, a couple of stops, a route in Roseville, the B line, or excuse me, the A line, I should say, that required us to deal with a sort of the bus rapid transit overlay type concept and deal with some of the density requirements there. So there were a few more things that we had to deal with than we expected. But to answer this question, I think our hope was to do a relatively minor update. And I think we just got, as we got into it further, there just was more and more and more to deal with. So that's the reality versus what our expectation was. Thanks for deferring.
And Jennifer, were you next?
Yep. Hi, Jenny Geisler. I'm on the council for Coon Rapids, year 6.5. I've got 3.5 more to go. Prior to that, I spent 16 years on planning commission and was chair there. So spent a lot of time actually developing the earlier comprehensive plans. So from a council perspective, my opinion is I struggle with my peers to have them see any importance and value in the comprehensive planning process. Our staff does a phenomenal job, and our city manager, I believe that they use the comp plan and they build it, and that's what they work towards. But what I don't think we do a good job is having the people who approve it feel like they have to live to it. So because of that, I think from a council perspective, the majority of them see it as shelfware and not a living document that should be used in how we operate our city. And because I beat my head against the wall on that topic on a regular basis.
Thank you.
And so that's where I think some of the recommendations and things to actually get with councils, because Metro Cities is phenomenal, but you got to actually talk to and teach the council members what the value of the document is, how it works in their community, how it should be guiding what they should be doing, and how they should actually read it. So that's my 2 cents on that one.
Thank you. Jerry, you were unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, hi, I'm Jerry Bruner. I'm board chair of Watertown Township. The township is, most of the residents here want to keep it rural. We have a farming community. We have residents, of course, that are built on land that was designated by the county as eligible for residential housing. But probably the biggest item that we did here in the township is we passed an ordinance that is a lot stricter than Carver County's ordinance on solar projects. For example, you have to live on the land to be able to have a solar project. So this eliminates a lot of these speculators who buy up land and hope to put in solar projects to reap whatever they feel they want, and then stick the residents with the unhomely look of these projects. So that's probably the main thing that we did here in Watertown Township. We're not against growth. We approve housing in wooded areas and other areas that are allowed by the county. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. And Jerry is in Carver County, Patrick, in case you didn't get that. Anybody else?
Madam Chair, Phil
Yes.
Klein. I guess I want to bring up just a couple other things as we were going through, as I was speaking with our staff. One of the things that we recognized was that we did have a sector representative, and I wasn't part of this meeting, but in talking with my staff or with our staff, they had mentioned that they found that they were educating our sector leader as opposed to them trying to help us understand and communicate what they wanted or what we needed to do to get this thing approved as far as this comprehensive plan. The individual didn't know basically they knew very little about the city of Hugo and then some of the surrounding communities and some of the things that were going on. So it'd be helpful, I think, if the sector leaders who are helping would either make the territory smaller or have them get more in tune with what's going on in the actual areas with those communities that they're trying to help. I think it may be helpful. It would add more validity to what they're trying to say and try to do. One of the other things that we found too was that when we did submit the plans and we did it in our own words and the plan was rejected, and it's kind of unfortunate because I thought the way we were understanding that when we submitted the plans, everything had to be included. We did all that. We checked the marks, and it wasn't good enough. We didn't meet the language, particularly in the housing area. One of the things that we're running into is that here in the city of Hugo, we're in the MUSA district, but we're not in the transportation district. And they're kind of tied together, and it's a mumbo jumbo, and we had a hard time with the housing. Anyways, long story short, we found another community that had their housing approved. We cut and paste that, put that in ours, and then it passed. It was just anything just to get it through and get it over with. I mean, it was kind of actually, it was ridiculous, but that's what we did. And it did pass, by the way. But those are some of the things that if we're going to, as a community, make suggestions, it would be nice, suggestions and put these plans in place. This is our community. We want to help this move forward. If it's not going to be accepted, then what's the point if we have to change all the language just so they can meet certain criteria? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Thank you, Phil. And I think we've sort of worked our way into question number 2.
Yeah, if you want to advance to the next slide, but again, a little more specifically, you can move the next slide, please. Thank you. If you could change one aspect of the planning process, what would it be? And again, this could be technical assistance, process, communication, resources, something else. Phil definitely talked about a couple things. And again, I think we should keep going on this and jump off of this. And kind of the challenge then is to ask yourself, how would you change it and why? But just think about one aspect, and let's have a discussion around that.
Well,
Anybody else?
Madam Chair,
Sure.
Phil Klein.
Yeah.
One of the things is when we have goals, it would be nice that if we have goals, we would like to write the goals ourselves because we know what our community would like to do and where we're focusing, where we want to go, as opposed to have someone tell us what we need to do and where to go. I think that would be helpful.
Is there a part of your plan you're specifically referring to?
Some of it has to do with the housing. There's certain mandates that we have to. Like before I talked about the housing and we can't get the housing because we can't get the
Transit?
or the transit part of it, in transit coming into Hugo. So one depends on the other, and since we can try to do some of the housing, but we can't. Like for example, they wanted us, the Met Council wanted us to do 834 units from 2020 to 200, or from 2020 to 2030, and that's not conceivable. I mean, it's just we are a growing community, but that is very difficult to do, especially if you don't have transit. So it's we don't get any dollars, we don't get any funding, and that's one of the other issues is when we had additional requirements that we had to do, and we had no funding available from the Met Council to help offset that. So as a community, we had to pay for all that. That was very costly, and I don't know if it really prove beneficial or not. I'm not sure.
Okay. Thank you. You guys could use the hand raising feature too, or just speak up. Dan, I see you put, okay, there you go, Dan. You got
So
on there.
Wendy, if I can interject for a second,
Sure.
I've been fooling around with the layout, and so I can't really see everyone very well. So if you could, normally kind of facilitating this, I would be helping call in people. I appreciate what you're doing. Keep doing it because I can only see a few people at a time, and I'm trying to scroll through to see who is trying to speak up. So if you would keep doing
Yeah,
that,
I've
thank
got
you.
a list so I can
Okay.
see hand raises and unmuting. So,
Thank
okay,
you.
go ahead, Dan.
Thanks. I'm going to try to limit this to one aspect, but it might morph into two just because I have two on my list. I think the one thing that we noted in the process that was frustrating for us, and I think it related to our having to resubmit, was that there was at one point after we had done most of the work with our consultant, a point where we had to go back and readjust several things because of a changed population estimate or something along those lines. And so that meant we had to do a lot more work and spend more money with our consultant to update all those portions of the plan. So I think one of the suggestions would be to try to freeze the point at which things can be changed that we have to meet in our plan. So we don't sort of have to evolve it over the course of a year. I think the other aspect was, I think something came in sort of late in the game about looking at manufactured homes as well from a policy point of view. And so those were two things that we had to address sort of late in the game. And so I think we'd appreciate if there could be a way to sort of have the requirements of what has to be in the plan fixed in place at the beginning of the process and stay that way. And if there are new numbers or if there are new policies that people at Met Council would like to have addressed, we can maybe address those through updates or amendments after we get our plan finished, so we don't have to spend extra time and resources to sort of change in mid-course is the one. And then the other quick one is I think I would just echo what was said about getting people out to councils maybe early in the process. And I would emphasize perhaps the particular things, the particular requirements that are sort of maybe changes or new requirements for each individual city that we should be focusing on in our update to our comp plan. I think those two things would be helpful, sort of freezing in place what the requirements are, but then also spending some time up front telling us what those requirements are, so we can kind of focus especially on the changes and the new things that we have to be paying attention to.
Thank you, Dan. Jenny, you have your hand up?
Yep. Okay. So for me, as we have staff that does the majority of this, so that's a little easier on us. Yeah, they can't do other things, but at least we're not paying a lot of consultants. But I think to echo a little bit about what Dan said, that, as we start out to really, get to each one of these cities with the councils and say, here is the process that we're asking of your staff to do, and you as the council should own this document. And these are the things that are coming to your teams, and you really should engage at that level, because right now it really is more of a staff-led document. And granted, staff runs the city most of the day, right? But the elected officials really should have some more skin in the game. Than what they do today. And I think that by really engaging them at the start of the process would be easier.
Bill, can you mute?
I'm trying to.
I don't know if that was coming from you or where the echo is.
It
coming
is.
from.
Sorry. I'm gonna get out of it.
There we go. Okay. I don't see any other hands up. Anybody else want to answer?
Okay. And this is, as we move through this, again, my job is to listen, take some notes, and we'll be doing some analysis on this. But by all means, if something pops up you thought about, please feel free to shoot me an email or something. I have my contact information at the end of this. So,
Well, and Patrick, I do have a couple things that I've heard that might be relevant from some of my cities and others. There's been a lot of confusion about what you have to do and what are things that council would like you to do, but you don't have to do. And a lot of people were worried that they were going to be somehow graded and found wanting depending on how they answered on the housing questions of what tools they would use. They felt like they had to say yes to everything or they weren't going to get any livable communities money or something of that sort. So I think we need to maybe communicate better how that works and that you don't get graded on that. And that one was kind of a weird one anyway, because councils change over time, and committing for 10 years that you're going to use certain tools in certain circumstances is maybe a long time to make a commitment when your council changes every 2 or 4 years. So just my thoughts.
and if I can ask a clarification, by the council changing every 2 or 4 years, how does that relate directly to what's in the comp plan in kind of context of what you're talking about?
Well, because the whoever's the ones that sign up on the comp plan update are saying this is what we're going to do for the next 10 years. But if a city council has an election and there's different people with different priorities, they may not be able to get the votes to do those things. And then do they have to come back and amend their comp plan to say we're not going to use these tools, or how does that work? Or that they are going to use tools that a previous council said no? Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. So I guess we'll move on to the next. Oh, Steve, hand up. Okay, go ahead, Steve.
Thanks, Chair. And I think that this has really been mentioned before, but I just wanted to add it on there, particularly as Wendy, you were just talking about new councils and councils changing. I think one thing that from a resource standpoint that would be helpful with Met Council is something that I think the league does very, very well, and that is new council training. And with the assumption that you may have folks come on board that are in council that have no background in either planning commissions or other entities that help put the plan together, and really don't understand sometimes really what Met Council does, but really what the comp plan does and controls. And so I think we have tried at our city, I'm in the city of Woodbury, we have tried to have a new council member training program, really, which just brings everybody through every department and help explain how things work and what things are. But I think that there were resources from a standpoint from a new council member, because I think Member Geisler had mentioned that getting buy-in and understanding from councils is important. But I think from an approach of, hey, the council this new member may not have any understanding of what this process is. So really training from a resources would be my input.
Thank you.
Anyone else for this question?
I don't see anybody unmuted or hands up.
Okay. So next question, please, then. Or sorry, next slide, please. In your opinion, what are the most effective ways in which the council can support communities during the comprehensive planning process? We heard some responses earlier, I think, that kind of bleed into this. This is kind of what we heard last time, or rather in other focus groups, that the questions kind of meld together in terms of responses, and we're taking notes, so it doesn't really matter. But if anyone wants to take a stab at that, or it'd be great to hear from anyone. Thanks.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair.
You're muted, Wendy.
Sorry, I was muted. I was talking into nothing. Go ahead, John.
I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself on the last question. And I'm sorry I'm late to the party.
That's okay. You can answer the last question and this one. That's fine.
Oh, okay. I think some of the and I might be piggybacking, I'm sorry, but some things that I don't know were addressed already, but we ran into the problem of the moving target, but also our budget is much smaller than a lot of towns. So I wish there was some way to temper expectations of a 5,000, you know, at the time that we started, we had, I think, 6,000 people. So the output is supposed to be the same basically for all of us, but we spend a fortune on our comprehensive plan. And it seems like our plan is expected to be as robust as other towns. And we spent a lot, and there was a high expectation, but no help in paying for our comprehensive plan. And then the other thing, I think we ran into some issues on, we had a solution, but it wasn't, and I'm going to use the word greater, and that may not be fair, but we had solutions, but they weren't the solutions that somebody who was looking at our plan would have chosen, or what seemed to be their favorite way to deal with one of the issues or the required issues. And so like it became an issue of, we had a different prescription, but it wasn't up to somebody else's. It wasn't in agreement with somebody else's, and it seemed to me like the prescribed solution was one that we didn't agree with. So therefore we had to do this back and forth for 6 months, and it seemed a little bit boorish to me. I think we can disagree, but and have it covered, and I didn't feel any flexibility from that standpoint in completing our plan. So sort of like on number 3, then the council could lay out a better template, but also maybe help us, even if it has to be approved, maybe have a lower expectation with the town with the smaller budget, or even help pay for it. If I mean, I think ours costs $250,000, and our town's budget was $5 million a year, and so that's a huge piece of our budget, and it seems a little bit high compared to when we have roads that aren't paved, and it seems a very high price for something for a town of our size.
Thank you. And Jonathan, we've been telling Patrick what city you're from and your role. And Jonathan is a city council member from Corcoran, so, right?
Yes, thank you.
And I see that Kathy Hemken has her hand up.
I do. Is my video working yet?
Yeah.
Okay. So, we have open meeting. I'm from New Hope, and I'm the mayor, and we're about 20,000. And we have open meetings in which we encourage our different commissions to come in and sit in on when we're doing the comprehensive plan. I think the last time we did it 10 years ago, someone from the Met Council came and did some training for us. And we just kind of passed that training on from who's ever on the council. We also have a group that where we take the new council members and take them to all the departments and explain. They get a copy of the comp plan, and then they're kind of questioned on it, so we know they're reading it. I think the Met Council has been very supportive for our city.
Okay, thank you. Jenny, you have your hand up still, or is that a new hand up?
It's a new one here. I would say, you know, a little bit, I love Kathy's ideas. Like, I wish we could have everybody kind of get tested on the comp plan. The most effective ways are communication. But I know that there are some ways to support some of the communities that do this. Our community is lucky enough that we have the resources internally to do a lot of it. But what maybe for the smaller, is there a template that everybody starts with? Here's a small, medium, and large, or maybe large doesn't make sense, but at least a small template for these smaller communities, and they just kind of fill in the blanks for some of these kinds of things, and it's a more iterative way for them and a cheaper way to get their comprehensive plans done, because the needs are different in those communities than the large communities. And I think if we looked at the completeness, or maybe not the completeness, the intensity and depth of the plans for some of the smaller cities, that may make it easier for them to step through the process.
Thank you. Kathy, is your hand up again or still?
No, it's still, it was, do I have to take it down somehow?
Yeah, you click there again to take it down, and then if you could mute, we're getting some feedback.
Okay.
Thank you. And then Jerry, were you wanting to say something? You're unmuted.
Well, yes, I'd like to ask a question here to Patrick. Here in the township, to be perfectly honest, I would think the majority of residents don't kind of jive with the Met Council in what they all do. So, what could you do here in the township to support the planning process? Because I believe that your planning process is probably contradictory to a lot of the residents here in the township.
Well, I think the efforts are to, examine the processes and tools we've done well, that have been helpful, and continue to do those, and to seriously evaluate and take a look at the things that we can improve. I'm not sure if you're asking a technical or a political question, or a little bit of both. I guess I'm not going to venture into that, but if Angela Torres wants to say something, offer a quick response, that might be okay too. Is that kind of your question, or?
Well, I'm not sure how it came across. It's just that people out here aren't big about light rails. They don't want pipelines through here. And so a lot of what the Met Council does, wouldn't probably sit too well out here. And so I was just kind of curious, what could the Met Council do? Maybe what it hasn't been doing to help Watertown Township, go ahead with this processes, and kind of explain to the residents why it's important to have these in place. So maybe the Met Council with its planning processes can do a better job.
Well, if I can twist my response a little bit and put a little shine a light on Chair Wolf. Wendy and I have spent literally dozens of hours out in Dakota County, which is a different place than where you're from, Gerald. But in terms of what the council can do, how we can help, how we can communicate, so we don't take too much time away from the focus group, I'd rather not get deep into response. But Wendy, maybe you could offer a couple of things, and then we can continue.
I can connect with Jerry offline too, because we're running kind of slow on here by my estimate.
Yeah, no, I don't want to stifle conversation in the least, but I'd rather not be responsive too much, just because I think this is time for LUAC to be interactive and time to engage with the members to other members, and for me just to listen. So that's kind of why I'm hesitant.
Yeah, no, I can talk with Jerry about that later. Okay.
I can offer a quick point if you'd like, Councilmember Wolf.
Go ahead.
A lot of the resources and efforts that we do to help townships like Watertown Township is talking about preserving rural areas and advocating for programs like agricultural preserves to ensure that things like the light rail and things like that that Member Bruner was talking about aren't part of the planning process. In Carver County specifically, the townships are planned for as part of the county plan. And so we do provide a lot of direct resources and assistance to the counties as well, Jerry.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for those replies. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. Does anybody else have anything they want to add? I believe we
If
have
there's
one more.
okay, go
question.
ahead. Mhm. Yep, that's right. Yeah, one more question. So what resources, technical assistance can the council provide to help with these challenges? Again, like the other responses, we kind of talked a little about that, but please bring it up again, or let's hear from everybody and anybody. Thanks.
Anyone?
Wendy, this is Kathy Hempton again.
Go ahead, Kathy.
I found that with my staff, they are very comfortable calling the Met Council and asking the questions and getting the support that they need. I think sometimes people don't realize that they can actually talk to you guys
Mhm.
and that you'll guide and help us through some of the questions. We hire an outside consultant, but I know a lot of the stuff is done by our staff. And I also know that they contact the council and get help from them.
Thank you, Kathy. Oh, and I just remembered for John's comment about the cost, one of the things that LUAC does in the early part of the comp planning process is figure out if there's money budgeted for helping cities and townships pay for their comp plan updates. The LUAC kind of figures out what's the formula for that and who should qualify. And so I would imagine that that will be coming up in a couple of years here as we go through the process of figuring out how are we going to distribute planning money to cities and townships. And I would have thought that Corcoran would have qualified, but we'll have to look at what we did last time and figure out why Corcoran didn't qualify, because that's a lot of money without getting any help from the council in order to get your plan done. Does anybody else have any final thoughts for Patrick? Oh, I see a hand up. Dan, go ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to note on the process of where cities have to resubmit because of various things. I'm wondering if that can be more of a, and I was just thinking, especially in Phil's situation with 4 resubmittals, if there's a way that it can be a little more collaborative rather than sort of a formal, you must resubmit process and working through that. And I think there probably is that stage, but to the extent you can go more towards that informal process rather than a more formal process, I think that might help. I don't know what that might look like, but that's just a thought in terms of, I know we had to resubmit ours as well, and there may be some ways to, where you can do more sort of behind the scenes, as it were, rather than the official request to resubmit. So just food for thought.
And depending on when you submitted, there were process improvements that happened. If you were early on, it was a little more arduous, if I remember correctly, and staff worked on improving the process. So if you were later in the calendar, you might have had a better experience than people who were the guinea pigs at the beginning. Am I correct, Patrick?
Well, I'm rather fond of guinea pigs, so I don't know if I'm going to agree with you on that. But yeah, I think we did our best to improve the process as we went along, and I think like any decennial review, I think it's it gets better over time. We'll leave it at that.
Jonathan, did you want something, or John, do you have something?
Yeah, I just, as we're wrapping up here, this is probably the biggest issue we have with the Met Council is these 2040 plans, and we've discussed just flat out not doing them and just accepting the consequence of that. because it's so arduous and tedious, and it seems like it's a 2-year argument with the Met Council. And I want to echo the collaboration part. I think we can collaborate, but it's very challenging. It is something we've talked about, and we throw our hands up sometimes, because in council, while we were going through the process, we'd say, what do they need? And the answer from staff, and I called down too, was, I don't know. We don't know what we need. We've submitted it multiple times and we can't get a clear answer, which seems befuddling to me. And I would love to talk about it offline. We don't need to bury this meeting in Corcoran's issues with the comp plan, but it was really frustrating for us. And if somebody would take time and walk through and meet with me and our city admin and learn from it, so it's easier next time, I'm really not looking forward to it.
Yeah, I just to interject here, I'll be happy to set that up, facilitate that.
Okay, sounds good.
Great, thank you.
We just have a minute or two left here, Wendy.
Okay, anybody else want to weigh in?
Just real quick, Madam Chair.
Go ahead,
This is
Phil.
Phil Klein, Hugo. I just wanted to ask, Patrick, are we going to share the feedback from these committees? And then also, moving forward, we're going to discuss the actions that are going to be taken as far as what the outcomes are going to be, what's it going to look like?
Yeah, we're going to be developing and publishing kind of a summary documents. And then what I'll do is I'll develop some recommendations. The team and I will develop some recommendations, and we'll float that through leadership and community development. But yeah, we'll share that with LUAC. Yes, we can do that.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Patrick, did you get what you were looking for?
Yeah, let's just go to the
feedback?
next slide. I just have a couple more things I'd like to say, and then I think we're pretty much done.
Okay.
So kind of like Phil said, we're going to be continuing to do analysis. I'm in the middle of doing the analysis for the focus groups we held last month. Some very interesting things we heard today, which are not too dissimilar from what we heard last month. So this has been a great conversation. Thank you. Again, summary is recommendations and to our CD leadership. Next slide, please. And this is my contact information. Certainly, if you don't get it, you can. Wendy knows how to get a hold of me, and as does Lisa Brajas and my manager, Angela Torres. Sorry, I'm not fumbling with her name. My apologies, Angela. Anyway, thank you very much, Wendy. And please get a hold of me, and I'll reach out to Corcoran shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. And if anybody thinks of something that they didn't say and would like to pass that information on to Patrick, if you go into the agenda to the PowerPoint, you can get his email address and email Patrick at any time with other follow-up thoughts, so that if you missed something or it pops into your head tomorrow or whatever, please email Patrick and give him the feedback, because the more information he gets, the better we can do next time with our process.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Chair Wolf.
And then next up, we have PlanIt Implementation Program with Raya Esmaeili.
Hi, everyone. I was wondering that everyone can hear me just fine.
It's a little muddled.
Okay.
Maybe with the microphone pipe by your face better.
Is it better now?
I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Is anybody else getting feedback?
It's almost as if the microphone's not being picked up.
Yeah.
Is it any better now?
No, it's still kind of muddled.
Yeah.
Let me just check my connection for a second.
How about now?
Yeah, that's much better. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. I don't know what was going on. Okay, well, hi everyone. My name is Raya Esmaeili, and I'm a senior planner in local planning assistance. I also work with Patrick, and I'm a sector rep for District 4, which is Carver County and most of Scott County. I'm here today to present to you the PlanIt implementation program, or in this case, in a kind of in a project manner. Can you please go to the next slide? Before I actually start, I should say that in this project, there's 3 of us who are more closely working together. One is Caitlin Shampoo, who you just met, so I'm not going to ask her to introduce herself again. And the other colleague of mine who is also part of the project team is Jerome Benner, who I believe is on the call. So I'm just going to ask him to very quickly just come on camera and introduce himself. Jerome, are you
Thanks,
there?
Raya. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yes.
Chair Wolf, members of the committee, as Raya mentioned, my name is Jerome Benner, senior planner and local planning assistance. Primarily, I serve as a principal reviewer, reviewing comp plan updates, amendments to those plans, and also environmental reviews. And I'm also the reviews coordinator for the council. I've been with the council since October of 2019 and looking forward to hearing your feedback. So thanks for having me.
Great. Thank you, Jerome.
Thanks.
Okay, going back to the presentation, and some of you have, maybe all of you are already very familiar with the PlanIt training program. Patrick did mention it in the Debrief Project as well. Just a quick background, the PlanIt training program started in 2016, and the goal was to provide resources that included workshops, webinars, tutorials. We had a one-day conference, and expert articles. Those resources targeted minimum requirements for the comprehensive planning. Then in 2017, we kind of switched gears and started to include more value-added planning resources to just go above and beyond minimum requirements. And then the project just, the training program just evolved, and after a while, what we have been doing is that we're still providing some resources, but less focus on, say, webinars and workshops, but we have continued a monthly podcast, which we try to focus on some topics that are, some things that people are working on or have come up, and then we publish news blasts every month, and sometimes fact sheets, sometimes highlights for communities. But most communities right now, as a lot of you are aware, are focusing on comprehensive planning implementation. In fact, 84% of all the plans that are required to be submitted to the Metropolitan Council have already been authorized. So we are pretty far ahead in that process. So as communities are focusing more on implementation of those plans, there are some areas that have seemed to be more challenging. So again, the PlanIt project has been providing some topics in the format of, say, podcasts that have been trying to focus on implementation. But the goal of this specific project that I'm presenting to you today, which we're calling it PlanIt implementation, is to very explicitly focus on implementation and extend our technical resources to provide assistance to communities as they're doing their implementation. So in that, this is a continuation, sorry, of the PlanIt training program, but focused on implementation. What we are trying to do is that we do have some existing resources and information that we would like to bring back to surface, and just remind people that there's some things that are already out there, but we also have heard, as Patrick mentioned, that some of those resources were very helpful, but also sometimes overwhelming. So being able to provide some of those again would be very helpful. But we are also, the main focus would be to create and provide new resources. These could be in a variety of formats, including examples of how local communities are implementing their plans. And we would hopefully be able to take advantage of some of the partnerships that we have with other institutions such as ULI, Metro Cities, and Great Plains Institute. And also another thing is that we are hoping that we are able to use our position to convene people and bring them opportunities to talk to one another even more than they already do so. The one thing that I want to note is that throughout this process, we do realize that it's the local communities who are the experts in implementing comprehensive plans. So as in implementation, we don't really play a role, but we can provide resources because of the way that we have access to a lot of areas that we can pull together those resources. But another thing would be that we want to partner with local communities to bring to surface some of the ways that they have been working on implementation. Next slide, please. Perfect. So the objectives of this project, as I mentioned, is that we want to provide technical resources in implementation. In doing so, we want to not focus on just one area, but we want to acknowledge that there's a variety of topics associated with comprehensive plans, and some of them were components that were more required, and some of them were areas such as, like, say, economic competitiveness, which people didn't quite know what to do with, but they weren't required, but still some information included with them. The other objective of this project is to be able to pull together resources in a variety of formats, similar to what we have done before, but expanded potentially. So we're like trying to figure out what formats work better, and what are the ways that people find more useful and more efficient to communicate those resources with them. And also we want to make sure that the way that those resources are provided give people the variety of opportunities to either like, say, a live event, but also do self-guided training or self-guided like resources that they can look through on their own. As part of this, when we started the PlanIt implementation effort, like, again, this honed in effort on implementation of comprehensive plans, one thing that we tried to take advantage of was the 2040 Debrief Project. So many times communities did share through those one-on-one conversations information about implementation, not just the way that the comprehensive plans were pulled together, but there was some information that we were able to gather from that process. But we also reached out to all of our internal divisions and units who were participating in the comprehensive planning review process and in requirements gathering and whatnot, and talked to them about implementation and about all the areas that they see as potential challenges in implementation in their respective areas, to just kind of walk through what could potentially be some topics that we should be focusing on. Then another thing that we have done, which I'm going to walk through right now, is that we did publish a survey and asked planners some of those questions about implementation of comprehensive plans. We were hoping for more responses, but we just got a very small sample of, well, 8. So we're just going to call it a sample of planners in the region. However, even that has proven to be useful, and because one thing to keep in mind for us is that this project is an ongoing effort. So whatever has come out right now is not it. we will be building on these resources using the sector rep program or other conversations and communication means that we have to gather information about where are the areas that we can potentially use our internal resources to provide technical assistance. So next slide, please. As I mentioned, we did send out that survey. All the responses were from local communities. So city and county planners were the ones who responded. We asked them about what are some priorities for them to focus on in the implementation of their comprehensive plans. And this is kind of an aggregated list of the information that they provided, and racial equity and inclusion is something that has risen to top. Then redevelopment, zoning update, affordable housing, natural resources, climate action planning, station area planning. And again, this is not just it. These are information that keep coming, but these are the ones that have come to the top. Next slide, please. Then we ask communities what are some barriers that they see in terms of implementation. The biggest barrier that has come up is funding. Funding is always a barrier. So some of the comments that they were made is need for better or greater affordable housing funding mechanisms or tax incentives, or that the time that it takes to get funding, or gap financing and kind of affordable housing financing in minority communities, and or additional like structure and infrastructure and things like that. So funding has been one of the top barriers for communities to implementation. The other thing is staff capacity, basically not having enough dedicated staff to implementation. And then um, there is the political will, whether or not it is a priority. Some of the things that staff want to focus on, whether or not are they priority for the community as a whole. And then there's redevelopment, and basically one of the things that there came up was coordination of redevelopment efforts, like talking to the property owners and then considering multiple properties and all the parties agreeing on that, and as well as bringing properties up to code and small parcel sizes needing consolidation and things like that. The other piece is the cost of constructing renewable energy systems such as solar for communities to be more resilient. Then there's engagement, and one of the things that did come up in this area was engagement related to during the time of COVID, but also communities like people realizing that some of the efforts that have been going on during the last year and a half, a lot of the engagement turning online is gonna stay, and how can they be as successful potentially as face-to-face engagement. And then the other thing is that as we are turning back to some face-to-face interaction, then now it seems that the effort has been doubled, because now you have to do both face-to-face and virtual. Then the other piece is something is multimodal planning, which I think is pretty clear, and also political pressure and state regulations. And state regulations in this case was pointing at regulations preventing cities from requiring more than state energy codes. Next slide, please. So we asked the participants where they think they need resources. So previously we asked them what's their priority, where are the barriers, but where do you think you need the most amount of resources? And it's the greatest need is in stakeholder engagement, followed by housing, and then transit and equity. So That being said, again, this information is the way that we're using this information is to just prioritize our resources because we realize that we don't have the time and staff manpower also to create everything at the same time. But we want to know where to focus that energy and time. They also identified some of this information being needed to share with policy and decision makers. Then, next slide, please. Something else that we asked them was what's their format preference, because we have tried to kind of like dip our toes into different areas, and one thing that everyone said was fact sheets followed by highlights and webinars. And I should say the fact sheet ones was kind of expected because we know that it's easy for people to they tend to be about 2 pages. And it's easy for people to share them with anyone, print it out, bring it to meetings and whatnot. And then the local planning highlights are what are other communities doing. And webinars are generally a good opportunity for people to ask questions live. So this is relatively expected. Next slide, please. We also asked, we tried to use this opportunity to ask communities about some already existing tools that are related to implementation. A lot of them, like it seems like people are familiar with some of these, but that, as you can see, that yellow line is wanting to learn more. So we realized that even the tools that we already have, we need to communicate better about them. And next slide, please. Okay, and then, oh, sorry. Next slide, please. There we go. We did also ask about a partnership that the Metropolitan Council has had in the last 2 years with the Resilient Communities Project. Some of you may have already heard that or have been a part of it. So we've partnered with the University of Minnesota for this to offer opportunities for local governments to receive research and technical assistance during the academic year. And this partnership generally has been focused on implementation efforts, like things that communities want to do but maybe don't have enough resources. So we asked them whether or not they still find a benefit in this project, and people are generally interested to apply in the future. They identified that the benefits to this program being like the outside perspective, getting the time from students and faculty for research, community engagement activities with which involves a lot of manpower, and the RCP project or the RCP and students involved can provide that, and also being able to report on findings and recommendations on best practices. For those who had already participated or were seriously considering it, they had a positive experience or outlook, but there were a couple of things that they were concerned about, and one was the project scope, or defining that project scope to be kind of smaller, and then lacking staff time to identify that project and lead that and commit to the work with students. Next slide, please. We asked communities about the PlanIt News Blast, which is a monthly email that we send out to communities, and the majority of them receive it. They said that it's good for providing information about the new resources, grant opportunities, upcoming events, but it can be more useful if additional resources are there about best practices, and they asked us to refine the format, and then also potentially being able to find that somewhere on the website. They seem to identify email and websites to be the best way to communicate still. Next slide, please. One thing that we have asked communities and we've been brainstorming is whether or not something such as a discussion forum would be helpful. And they answered yes, and seeing value in getting project implementation ideas from other communities, discussing successes and failures of projects, and creating relationships and partnerships with other communities. People had ideas about how often this should happen, but something that we have at the same time been exploring different formats and platforms, and what we have come to the conclusion, that this is probably best held as a discussion panel and in a quarterly manner. Next slide, please. So based on the information that communities have provided, and then from the debrief, from the internal communication, and from our general communication with local communities, we have identified a few different areas that we want to focus on in the upcoming months. And you can see it on the slide here. I'm not going to read through every single one of them, but as you can see, we have tried to identify different formats, different topics. Some of them are still a little vague because we are exploring what's the best way to communicate that, what is the best information that we can provide. And so that's something, this is an ongoing list. This is just a few of them that are in process right now. Next slide, please. Okay, so with that, what I have brought to you here is I would like to ask for your feedback in identifying any additional challenges of implementation that we didn't capture here, and any ideas for resources that are needed to support implementation, or generally any additional feedback that you have about the information that was presented here. So with that, I'm done talking.
Thank you. Anybody have any feedback or questions for Raya? Not seeing any hands up or anybody unmuted.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Bill.
This is Phil Klein from City of Hugo. Yeah, when talking with staff, they liked the overall program. They thought it was very well suited for the comprehensive plan and just overall city planning, and they felt comfortable with using it. It's if you make any additional changes, I guess I don't know what they would be. Right now, our staff has been very happy with the way it's all come so far, and very pleased with working with your staff as far as trying to figure out if they had any questions or anything. Everything seemed to be moving relatively smoothly. So it's good. It's a good operation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Anybody else?
I should say this is certainly not your only opportunity. As you saw, that my contact information was also part of the PowerPoint, so you can always reach out to me if you have any ideas later on as well. So just want to put that out there.
And this one is a long-term one, because
Yes.
however long you're working on your implementation, if you come up with something that you're having trouble with, you can always email and ask for one-on-one help, or a podcast, or whatever, any of those other.
Yeah,
types of
if you
things.
haven't signed up for our podcast, I mean, we have 30 some episodes already. It's been ongoing. It's a PlanIt program on Apple and or Google Play. You can subscribe to it.
Going once, going twice, anybody? Okay, well, thank you, Raya, for the
Thank you.
informative presentation, and everybody feel free to follow up with her if anything comes to mind that you think your city needs help with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up on the agenda is source water protection and connections to land use with Lanya Ross.
Hello. Is my audio working all right?
It is.
Excellent. So this is changing gears in some ways, but I was really excited to hear, I think, some good connections between what I'm going to talk about and what Patrick and Raya shared earlier. So, so I'm going to kind of blast through some information that I think you will be interested in, and I hope that leaves us some time for discussions and to get some of your perspectives and ideas. Next slide, please. So, really quickly, my goal is to give you a little bit of an update on some of the council's water supply planning work. I'm going to touch a little bit on some of the water supply information that we pulled out of the local comprehensive plans, which is a great resource we've been mining for information. I do want to remind you and share a little bit about the 2020 report to the legislature, and I'm going to give you just 2 examples of some recent water supply efforts. And then that leads into why we are working with our metro area water supply advisory committees and TAC on the work plan that they've established. And particularly, I want to share a little bit about their conversation about land use and water supply, and then end with some next steps. Next slide. So you have seen this information in the past. Last spring, this was included in a presentation about the 2040 comp plan composite. There were some takeaways related to water supply, and I just wanted to bring those back to remind you, particularly because I do want to acknowledge that what we've seen in those local plans so far show some significant local investment in water supply infrastructure across the region. So it's really important for us to keep water supply planning and infrastructure thinking sort of front of mind, because there are some really big investments coming up. We have also looked at water demand that we see in those local plans, and we see as a region overall some really good progress in reducing the per person water use, but it is varying from community to community. So there are still some opportunities there, and I think some good value in our ongoing water efficiency and conservation program. The attention to groundwater and surface water interactions is growing, and we're seeing that in local plans in a variety of ways, particularly in the local water management plans. So that's surface water planning, bringing in more groundwater aspects. And something that's really near and dear to my heart is recognizing that although a very large part of the metro area has been designated for source water protection, it's still somewhat inconsistent how that's addressed in the local comprehensive plan. So I think there's some good opportunities there for us to continue improving and thinking about source water protection, particularly as it connects to land use, which is one of the reasons I'm here. Next slide. For the visual learners, I just wanted to share this. This is a map, and we still are going to be updating it with some more data, but it highlights where communities are planning to invest in their local water supply systems. And so we see communities across the region planning on some new wells. That's the blue map. I'm planning to maintain or expand their distribution systems, so that network of pipes. That's the map in green. And then also a number of communities planning investments in enhancing or replacing and doing work on their water treatment. So that water quality aspect is also an important investment that is being planned across the region. Just food for thought, keep that in mind. Next slide. So that was information that we're pulling out of the local plans, and that the water supply planning unit, me and my 4 other colleagues are working with. But we have done a number of other projects as well. And I know some of you have worked or gotten updates on some of that, but if you are interested in the wide range of work that the council has done, we just submitted a report to the legislature documenting all of our activities from 2005 to 2020. So that's a great resource to have at your fingertips. I encourage you to look that up. But not only does it just document what we've done, it also gives us some things to think about going forward. And those include some questions that we've heard from stakeholders in committee conversations from many of you. How could equity be implemented in water supply planning activities? What's the impact of climate change on our resources and operations in the water supply sector? How can we strengthen land use and water supply planning connections? And what can we do to prevent contamination of our water supply sources and to respond more effectively to emerging contamination? Recent examples of that would be PFAS, some of the emerging chloride questions, for example. So those are some things we have in mind as we think about future planning efforts, future updates to policy, etc. So we've been doing some work. I'm only going to give you a couple examples of the projects we're working on now. I think that you will be interested in these, but we have other things going on as well that we'd be happy to bring before you. But I want to start with some work we're doing on climate. So the next slide, please. This is what demonstrates how geeky I am. So indulge me, please. I'll walk you through this. But one of my favorite projects this year was a modeling project that was done, one, just to test the feasibility of can we bring climate projection data into our regional groundwater model. Yes, we can, which was very exciting to find. But this kind of effort allows us to explore and better understand how a range of projected climate, particularly precipitation and temperature, could change infiltration, which is the amount of water that, the precipitation, rain and snow that falls down onto the land surface and then is able to move down below the root zone to recharge our aquifers. So kind of infiltration is that really important kind of transfer of water from the land surface down below roots, the groundwater below. So to look at this, we started with our existing regional groundwater flow model. And that's the model that we used and provides information in the Water Resources Policy Plan, affectionately known as Metro Model 3. But it includes a tool to estimate infiltration. So this is what we used. To give you a baseline, a frame of reference, I included on here the average infiltration rate that we estimated using Metro Model 3 as part of the Water Resources Policy Plan work. So on average, across the 11 county metro, based on historical climate data, we estimate about 8 inches per year of water infiltrates, moves down across the region into our ground. But that represents data from 1988 to 2011. So one of the things that we did in this recent modeling effort was to look at this past decade, because it was a wetter than normal decade. We've heard stories all over the metro about water tables coming up, and we just have experienced some wetter conditions, not including this year. So we included data from 2010 to 2019 in our model. And you see that little tiny map of the 11 county metro, and you'll see that it's mostly green colored. So looking at this legend here of annual infiltration, you'll see that the green colors are 10 to 12 and 12 to 14 inches of infiltration. So should climate be similar to what it was over the past 10 years, sort of wetter than average, we might expect to see our infiltration and our underlying groundwater go up. So that's one possible future. But what's not the case? So we also ran a whole suite of global climate models. We pulled the climate data from 7 different global climate models, and we looked at some different, these RCP is representative concentration pathways. We have some experts here at the council who will define this much better than me, but I sort of think about it as different scenarios for emissions. So if we have, if we really curb global climate change, that would be RCP 4.5. But if things kind of just go a little wild, that would be RCP 8.5. We're essentially kind of looking at an envelope of different futures. So we have this whole ensemble of possible futures. And that's what you're seeing here in these 9 boxes to the right. And they're brown. Probably the takeaway when you look at that. And that is suggesting that we might see in the future infiltration on the 2 up to 8 inches per year. We may be seeing a drier future, infiltration-wise. And what's interesting to me is what that kind of tells us and helps us think about the water system, because we may have a global climate model that projects the same amount of precipitation or even wetter conditions in terms of precipitation. But if that falls as a high intensity rain event, or if that falls as snowpack and then the temperature goes up and it melts really fast, it's more likely to run off and not sink down into the groundwater system. Or alternatively, if our temperatures go up and our growing season lengthens, that precipitation that falls is going to be taken up by plants, and again, won't go down into our groundwater system. So there are multiple factors that could be affecting our future groundwater situation, which, being one of our primary water supplies, is something that is important for us to keep in mind. And I think looking at climate in relation to the groundwater system and understanding that if we have a wetter future, our groundwater might go up, but it also might go down. When we think about policy, how can we develop policies that are going to be resilient and going to be flexible? So I just wanted to share that information with you and bring that to you to think about a little bit. This is a really new project we're working on, so just put that in your mind for a moment. We can talk about it a little bit later. Quantity is an important part of the water supply issue, right? And it's one of the things I'm seeing here, for example, is that continuing to support our water efficiency programs has value. If we see a drier future, that's going to really pay off for us in the future. But we also want to think about being prepared for rising water tables. What does that mean for how we want to think about our stormwater management? Just completely hypothetical examples to bring to your attention. Next slide. Shifting gears, quantity is one part of what I spend a lot of time thinking about and with my colleagues in water supply planning. Quality is another important piece. And so I want to shift to source water protection. One project that I'm working on right now with Emily Steinweg, Ali Al-Hassan, and the Department of Health and Communities in the West Metro is a pilot project where we're beginning to explore doing wellhead protection planning with multiple communities together. And this map is particularly helpful to me to explain why. This is illustrating the parts of the metro that have been designated as drinking water supply management areas for municipal water supply systems for groundwater users. This doesn't include the watershed contributing to Minneapolis and St. Paul, just for simplicity's sake. But I want to call out two things about this. One, source water areas have been designated across the entire metro. There are some smaller cities on the edge of the metro who also have to protect source water, and they're kind of independent, and so they're looking at this and having to go it alone. There are also areas in the metro where multiple communities' source water areas overlap one another. And so these are some opportunities where coordination might be improved, or there's some challenges with multiple jurisdictions. So those darker blue areas are where the overlapping source water areas are located. And this map actually shares a new piece of information I haven't brought to LUAC before. I know you've seen some maps of the drinking water supply management areas in past presentations, but this map brings in the people, the number of people who are served by water flowing through these areas. That makes sense. So groundwater that's flowing beneath the darkest blue area here is supplying public water supply systems for one or more of the region's largest cities. So for example, that very darkest blue area just north of St. Paul is an overlapping source of groundwater for St. Paul, as well as the cities of New Brighton, Shoreview, Badness Heights, and White Bear Township. So combined, that really dark blue area is a source of water for over 450,000 people. And I always want to, I'm trying to keep myself grounded in, we do this water supply planning, but it's ultimately for the people who are drinking and using that water. So this may be an interesting facet of this water supply piece that is useful or interesting to keep in mind when we think about how land use in some parts of the region may affect drinking water sources for larger populations than in other parts of the region. All parts of the region and source water protection are critical and important. So, but kind of thinking about these different populations, I think is an interesting facet. Next slide, please. So when we catch up here, think about the connections between land use and water supply in all of our diverse communities across the metro. I do think one aspect to pay attention to is how activities on the land may increase both water demand. The more people we put there, the more water they use. We may be installing new wells, but it also changes the risk of water supply contamination in some cases. So this is a table that comes as information from the Minnesota Department of Health, and a quick glance just reveals that these different land covers have a variety of different associated potential contaminants related to water supply. And so there are, a number of programs that exist, Department of Health, PCA, Department of Ag, some local programs to help identify and manage potential risks like this. I also was thinking of this table when I heard the presentation from Ellen Esch at LUAC at your last meeting on May 20th, when she was talking about ecosystem services and green space. So thinking about how programs or work like that relates to water supply is something that's always of interest to me. Slide. So, big topics, important to protecting water supply. That brings me to the next thing I wanted to share with you, which is the current goal for the Water Supply Advisory Committees, MOSAC and TAC, led by our chair, Wendy Wolf, to produce by 2022 a set of recommendations and supporting information around high priority water supply topics. And that is to be a resource to support the update of the Council's Regional Development Guide and the related policy plans. And so these recommendations in this report may include technical studies, recommendations for policy updates, recommendations for collaboration, funding, etc. So that's something that is being worked on now and will be available in 2022. Next slide. So we've had many conversations over the years at past committee meetings, meetings with the Land Use Advisory Committee, interviews with our Water Supply Advisory Committee members, and we have seen land use and water supply interactions highlighted again and again as a priority topic. And these are just a few examples of the comments that we heard in some of those conversations. And I think that one thing that really has struck me about this is some of the conversations about recognizing that things we do on the land leave a legacy for the future. That could be legacy contamination, or that could actually be legacy good drinking water. So that was something that has stuck with me. Also, the recognition of, we put in this investment in this infrastructure, which is in the ground and we can't really move, but we kind of change our land use thinking. And so I, heard the comment too, like it's hard to be a utility and plan for good water supply infrastructure when the goalposts keep moving. So how do we coordinate that land? Next slide. So the committee's work plan, MOSAC and TAC's work plan, is here for you. We are going to be we spent the spring and we'll be spending summer and fall focusing on some topic areas and drafting recommendations. And then into the fall and winter, the draft report will be shared with some stakeholders. Our goal is to approve the report in January 2022, and then going into 2022, working on outreach and engagement around these recommendations to share the findings, the information, and sort of help integrate that with different stakeholders' work. Next slide. Just wanted to, as we think about water supply and land use, and particularly source water protection, because I know that's been an area of shared interest between the committees, I wanted to share with you some of the questions that we have been sharing with the advisory committees, water supply advisory committees. We just had a meeting with our technical advisory committee about this topic last month. But I'm really curious, and we'd like to hear from you, from water supply advisory committees, what trade-offs and tensions do you perceive that might shape the public support for protecting source water through land use choices. And we just had a good conversation about what resources might be most helpful. Also, who do you see or feel in your community is most affected by expectations for source water protection, or is most concerned about or impacted by changes in water supply infrastructure? If a new well is drilled, or if a certain neighborhood is now served by public water, might be an example. And also, how could the council or organizations represented on the Metro Area Water Supply Advisory Committee help? So state water agencies, the council, public water utilities, county and city officials. I'll come back to that. But just to let you know what the next steps are, next slide. We are going to be discussing land use and water supply with MOSAC next week. After that, MOSAC and TAC are going to continue exploring groundwater and surface water interactions, and then also the topic of infrastructure. And then that will be shaping the draft MOSAC report to the council and the legislature due in 2022. So that's kind of where we're going from here. And with that, I have shared most of my brain with you. I would welcome any questions or any response to the questions I had on slide 12.
Did you want him to go back to that slide?
Yeah, if that would
with the
be, if there's
questions?
time and interest, yes, please, back to slide 12.
Okay, thoughts? Steve?
Yeah. So Steve from Woodbury here. So how about now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So Woodbury is in a unique situation, and I'm cognizant of that. So I had two questions, both on related to MOSAC and TAC a little bit. But do they have members from the DNR and PCA as well on there?
Yes.
Okay. Because that really, for me, the questions, as I read the 4 questions, understand that each community is going to be different. White Bear Lake has certainly got different requirements because of their situation, as well as any of the impacted communities in Met Council's jurisdiction as part of the current 3M settlement, et cetera. So this, my thought is, as a city, just being a representative of the city of Woodbury, we're not going to want to have anything to do with this, because all of our questions and all of our policies and all of our direction is going to be 100% driven by the lawsuit. And how do we design our system, our policies, everything about water is driven around what we're able to do around that lawsuit. So that's just my thought, is particularly as MOSAC and TAC, I would want them to recognize that not all cities are going to be able to have these kind of corresponding work lanes going at the same time, just because it's great, Met Council, I love you, but they're paying the bills. If the 3M settlement's paying the bills, and whatever our plan is, they get to make those decisions. As much as I hate that, PCA and well, not PCA, DNR is in charge of our water at the end of the story for those communities. So that's just my feedback there, is just recognize that not all communities within the Met Council's jurisdiction are going to be able to comply or participate. Thanks.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Phil?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. It's Phil Clapper with Hugo. I agree with Steve. In some respects, we're in the same situation. We are going to be bound by the White Bear Lake judge's decision on whether or not we're going to be able to even pump water for our residents. And we don't know if right now, if even all the efforts that we've made to do our water conservation, which has been substantial, will even be taken into account. And it's a real problem for us. And we're still moving forward full steam ahead as far as trying to implement new water conservation projects. But we still have this lawsuit hanging over us, and we're not exactly sure how it's all going to pan out for us in the end. So it's kind of a day-by-day basis. It's kind of frustrating, but because it seems like we're trying to do the very best that we can do, and we've had tremendous support from the Met Council and from other various agencies, but it's just not going to be quite enough if we have to do certain other things as far as water community.
Are there, with the water conservation, is there anything that could be, I mean, that would be particularly helpful? We've got the water efficiency rebate program, which we did just get more funding for, which was good news I just heard recently. But if there's anything else along those lines too, that's always helpful to know. And you can always share now or let us know later.
Kathy, did you have something?
No, I was just curious about the lawsuit in Woodbury. What is that?
We're talking the 3M settlement related to 3M contamination with PFAS in the Eastern Metro.
Oh, got it. Okay. I'm on the West Metro, so I don't.
Highlighting the differences of communities.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Kathy.
We get our water from Minneapolis, so we're good.
If you don't have any more questions, if you could mute so that we don't
Sure.
get feedback. Thank you. Jerry.
Yes, I would like to, I've heard more about how weather is affecting all your planning. Because clearly you don't get rain, all your numbers are out the window. Clearly you could look at the western part of the country, even parts of the state are in drought. So to me, it's hard to plan these things because it all depends on the weather and the amount of rain you get. So I would like to have heard something about what you think. Our climate is clearly changing. You can say global warming or whatever, but I would like to have heard something more about what you think Minnesota's weather is going to be into the future. Because if we go into drought like the western part, the lakes and everything dries up and everything changes, doesn't it, or not? So
Yeah, and that is something I will jot down too. We have the state drought task force and Met Council does participate in that, although it's statewide, but it definitely impacts us. And another project that might be of interest too is the research we're doing with the University of Minnesota and the turf grass specialists there to look at turf grass choices and finding landscape options that are much more tolerant to drought. So that's a little bit more of our long-term planning role, but projects like that might be of interest to you. Brian Davis is my colleague who is really active in a lot of that work.
Any other questions? With water supply, it's a little more resilient than the coming and going of your plants for drought. I know in the aughts, as they may say in old times, we had a pretty significant drought going in the region and the aquifer was dropping pretty significantly, and we've done a decent amount of replenishing it with having a wetter decade after that. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of it.
Chair Wolf.
Yes, Phil.
One of the things that we've been noticing since we've had drier weather is even though we have our ponds that we've been storing our water in, we've been finding that people who are connected to them have been using them inappropriately, actually basically overwatering their lawns. So now we're looking at, as a matter of fact, we're going to have this conversation this Monday night at our council meeting about putting restrictions on even pulling out of our stormwater ponds because people are starting to abuse it. And we've even found some people, believe it or not, who have taken a hose. It's hard to believe, but they've taken a hose and hooked it to their water against the house, alongside their house, and they turn the water on to fill the stormwater pond back up. It's not that they're empty. It's just I don't know. It's different. But anyways, I just wanted to just mention that we are starting to look at putting restrictions on how much stormwater folks are going to be able to use as far as watering their lawns.
Okay, thanks for sharing. Dan, did you have a comment or question?
Yeah, I think the only thing I was going to observe is I think that cities that tend to, buy the water, surface water wholesale from Minneapolis or St. Paul may not have the same perspective as the cities who use groundwater for their city water. And I think a lot of, and that includes Roseville, I think a lot of us don't necessarily see us as part of the problem necessarily because we're not, using groundwater for our city water. So I think anything that can be done in terms of helping to educate sort of, each sort of niche user of water and what your source is based on that and how you can still have an impact across the metro area, I think is probably important because like I said, I think a lot of us that buy our surface water from St. Paul, we're figuring, the Mississippi River is going to be there forever and we don't have to worry about it, so to speak. So I think that would be helpful as part of the process is just to make sure that messages are tailored for different situations to help people understand how they can still have impacts, and especially from our point of view in terms of land use decisions.
Well, but you do have an impact on other people's water from what infiltrates through your community down into the aquifer.
Exactly, and I think that's the thing that a lot of people don't think about.
Thank you. Steve, do you still have your hand up from before, or do you have something else? Okay. Anybody else have comments or questions? Not seeing anybody. And we're almost out of time anyway. Lanya, do you
Yeah,
have any
Madam
last?
Chair?
Oh, go ahead, Jerry.
I just thought that this last presentation was very good.
Thank you.
I'm a big water person and I found it very interesting and the lady that presented it did very well. So
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.
Glad it was
Thank you,
useful.
Lanya. Do you have anything else you wanted to share with us before you go?
No, but thank you. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
your attention.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody, for your participation, and see you again in about 2 months.
All right.
The meeting